Yeah. And what's your name? Andre.
I was like, what about me? What did you say your name?
We can start.
Sure. Yeah, so thanks so much for coming. I'll be talking for about 20 minutes, and hopefully then we have a lot of space for questions, criticism. What I'm going to do is talk a little bit about my practice, and then focus on the reason why I'm here, and this is where I'd really love to have your feedback.
I was like, what about me?
So I'm a curator, writer, editor, and I've worked so far mostly between the US and Canada.
Yeah, so thanks so much for coming. I think I'll be talking for about 20 minutes, and hopefully then we have a lot of space for questions, criticism. What I'm going to do is talk a little bit about my practice and then focus on the reason why I'm here, and this is where I'd really love to have your feedback. I'm a curator, writer, editor, and I've worked so far mostly between the US and Canada, and a little bit also in France, and done research elsewhere as well. And for a while I was the editor-in-chief of Art Papers, which is, I would say, the most important non-profit contemporary art magazine in the US. So it's very rare to have a non-profit that has national and international reach. But that magazine came out of the Art Workers Coalition in the 60s, which was the first moment of artists kind of driving for empowerment and for more equitable sort of conditions. And it's the only sort of still existing kind of offshoot of the Art Workers Coalition. Then for a while I was the director and curator of several biennials, and in 2017 I decided to go back to, I think, the most important part of my work, which is the curatorial research. And I started a project that initially I thought would take about 3 years, and now I realize that it's probably going to be the rest of my life, or I think about it right now as the kind of deep project that will have several manifestations, but that could last 20, 30, 40 years, which is kind of interesting as a curatorial premise. Not that we're working for an institution, or that we're surveyed as a curator, but that you have a field of research that you pursue, and that every collaboration that you make are to move forward this project. So that's my kind of hypothesis right now. And the project that I'm researching right now, I'm calling it the currencies of hospitality. And I'm using the term currency in all of its meaning, so the kind of tool of exchange, and also kind of a current, something that's alive, like an electrical current, and something that is contemporary. So that's why I'm not just saying hospitality, as several projects are being framed to kind of complexify that notion. And the gist of it is that I'm kind of making a bet that the concept of hospitality, which is a philosophical concept that is very important, not only in the West but elsewhere, has thoroughly infiltrated all field of social, cultural, economic life, often in a kind of stealth way. So you have a hard time thinking, I mean, if you think hospitality, you think, hospitality industry, you think maybe someone serving you tea, it's kind of very benign. But actually, the concept of hospitality that I'm interested in, realize that the word hospitality comes etymologically from the same place as hostility. So that for a hospitable relationship to happen, there's always a little bit of hostility or danger. And that to me is really crucial, and it separates it from a lot of like relational practices or questions of kinship or conviviality or even a gift. And just another aside, kind of theoretically, the difference for me also with hospitality is that there should be no notion of debt or duty. So the moment that you're doing something because you ought to, either because this is a friend or a friend of a friend or socially, you know, the moment that this is, or that there is a kind of relationship that has some form of accounting, like I give you this, you give me that, a kind of quid pro quo, it's not hospitality. Like there has to be the possibility of danger, and you don't know what the outcome will be. So it's not about reciprocity, but it's more about elaboration. So moving it forward to a destination that is perhaps unknown.
And so the problem with that is
so that's a kind of theoretical framework.
Increasingly so, never have
Theoretically, the other challenge, and I think that's a really important one, is trying to decouple hospitality from the home. Because the moment that you talk about home, often you talk about property. And all of the examples that we have, I mean, just think about it, it's always about opening your home, whether it's your home country or your road.
So, for example,
and so the problem with that is that so many people on the planet,
if it's in the middle of the street,
so
right here in front of us, how does that happen? Like, I don't know. So these are the kind of questions for which I have no answers, but I think they're really, really important one and trying to figure that out. So the project, methodologically, I decided also that the project should be developed under conditions of hospitality. Because for each project, for me, it's like, you should really think about how you're going to answer those questions, and methodology is really important. So for this one, because there is this network and this...
Methodologically, I decided also that the project should be developed under conditions of hospitality. Because for each project, for me, it's like, you should really think about those questions, and methodology is really important. So for this one, because there is this network and this reality of artist residency within the art world, there was already a structure of hospitality. And so since 2017, except for COVID, has happened through a succession of residencies such as this. And I select them very specifically to ask a particular question. And this will continue. I don't think that you can really research hospitality from for me anyhow, from our house in New York. It would be purely theoretical. I would say that the living condition, or in Marx's term, the conditions of production kind of dictate what the outcome is. So I chose that, and so that was one of the premise. The other kind of methodological or ethical, maybe, dimension of the research is that, and this is much newer, maybe like 2 years ago, I decided that, or realized that often when you talk about hospitality, there's much written about how to be a good host. I mean, there's lots of manuals, often addressed at women, to tell you how to host properly. But there's very few treatises or texts about how to be a good guest. And the biggest challenge, or one of the challenges that I did not realize at the beginning, is fully. And so what I decided is that from now on, whenever I have an invitation, I would say yes. It's a gift, but it's maybe destabilizing, and so that's it for the methodology. So far, and so at the beginning of the project, I was very lucky to be invited to be a curator in residence for 3 years at an arts center in the US. And so I decided to use this opportunity to develop 3 kind of dimensions of the project. And these three dimensions were because they were quite site and context specific. So the place where I worked at is in the very middle of the US. Like if you take the map, it's right in the center. It's you know, a zone that is very agricultural, so big agro monoculture, terraforming, all of that is very much in play. Extensive use of pesticide, the highest rate of child cancer in the US, but a complete denial of those facts. So that, you know, and also when I first flew there, there'd been a big flood, and so I'd be flying over for half an hour of just flooded terrain, right? And I was like, oh my God, like, and hearing also during the bird migration, you know, thousands and thousands of birds dying because they couldn't migrate, they couldn't feed, they couldn't stop. So the you know, the environmental impact was huge. So I decided to kind of look at, with two artists, the intersection of hospitality, habitat, as that notion is constructed, and financialization. And so we worked with a scientific field station, and also with citizen scientists and just bird lovers. And the other thing that was really interesting, we focused on birds because this is a place that is very politically polarized. So it's, you know, everything you hear about the US, 50% like liberal, 50% super conservative. But when this place is also, or I heard that this place was the place with the highest concentration of bird lovers. And of course, bird lovers transcend and they cross all political lines. So I thought maybe this is the way to reframe a conversation around something that people love, right? Maybe if we start with the birds, we can talk about environment, your garden, what are you planting, and so on, through very low, you know, non-threatening conversation. So that was kind of the bet. So we worked with biologists, with field stations, with the Audubon Society, with just bird lovers, and just like I started like stalking all of these listservs, connecting with all kinds of people. We brought everyone in for a kind of conversation where we presented the project very early on and asked for feedback, criticism, blah, blah, blah. And the project kind of grew out of that. So that was, you know, for about a year and a half. This project continues now to move through the world. And every time we present it somewhere, we also do a residency, connect with people locally. And often the artist will produce new work that extends this conversation and extends the thinking, and now there will be the third presentation. The second project was kind of completely shifted because of COVID. It was supposed to be a live performance called The New Inflation, and this is where I started thinking about economics and hospitality. It ended up being a film simply because we couldn't do the kind of performance that was required. You know, it was kind of performance where the performers are kind of moving through the crowd in a very kind of dense space, not a kind of scene and audience. And so it was, at one point we realized not possible, and so the project shifted to a film, and in a way that is kind of the seed for my research here. And so I'll talk about that more when I talk about this. And then the third and last project I did was looking at the intersection of the body and hospitality. And so when I started asking myself this question, you know, I'm an art historian by training and like theory and art history. So I thought, okay, what's the first depiction of a transplant in art? And I just realized I didn't know that. So I thought 19th century maybe. And I was like totally shocked to realize that was in the 14th century. And it's the depiction of a story of, you know, lives of this. So if like in the late Middle Ages, if you could read, and you would probably have two books, the Bible, and then you would have the Golden Legend, which was basically the lives of the saints. And so this was like a medieval and early Renaissance bestseller. And in that book, there's the story of the saints Cosmas and Damian, who are now kind of known as the saints of medicine. And the story goes like this. This white man is dying, and the saints come to him in a dream. And they say, just today, this Ethiopian man was buried in the cemetery. Let's go chop off his leg and swap them. So the very birth of the concept of this technology, which is transplantation, is racialized and extractive. And that just blew me away. Like the whole project just kind of like the earth trembled and the whole project reshifted. But understanding that 600 years before you can actually heal bodies through a mechanical intervention, 600 years before already, which bodies will be deserving of healing and which will not. And this continues today. I mean, if you look at like the black market in transplant, it's always white recipients and, medical tourism or, always taking black and brown bodies as the engine of healing. And so my last show started there from that place, trying to understand how is the concept of hospitality define what we think bodies are, what they can do, what they are in tune with, and how. And so looking, way back at sort of early sort of medical history, all the way now through artificial intelligence. So it's a really big. The show traverses this very vast territory, and asking a series of questions that allow us hopefully to go beyond like post-humanism or transhumanism, and of course not denying that, but that's like so basic. What else can we learn, and what can we learn from the work of artists working around the world? The other thing I should say is that with this project on hospitality, the other thing that I've decided is that I would not do a show once. Like often if you work in an institution or if you're an independent curator, you do an exhibition and that's it. And I just, at this point in my practice, I don't want to use these many resources, be they financial, intellectual, emotional, the resources of my network, and to do just one show. So the exhibitions are built to be always itinerant and iterative, so constantly shifting, responding also to the context where they are. And so an exhibition theoretically could go on for 10 years, being constantly, and also learning from the exhibition. So the problem with a lot of curating for me is that when the exhibition opened, it's as if it was finished, where actually this is when it starts. But as a curator, when it opens, you think, oh, my project is done now, right? And then you pass it on to, in a bigger museum, to the educational department or public programming, and you're on to the next thing. But you rarely take the time to really understand what you've done. So you're working from this idea of the intention of the show or the research question, but an exhibition does things, and works coming together do things that are, if you're successful, much greater than what you thought they would do. So how do you integrate that within your process? And so this is why these all of the projects that I've named have to be developed in this way for me. And it's a question of sustainability, but also a question of research and methodology. So I'll leave it at, well, I'll just talk a little bit so my next project is growing out of the project with Liv Schulman, which ended up being her first feature film called The New Inflation. And it came out of, she's from Argentina, and but also has been living in Paris, so she has like the two residencies. She's a resident of both Argentina and France. And the project came out of just her reality of growing up in Argentina in the 90s, when, with the IMF and the moment after the dictatorship, how inflation is, something that you experience every day. So if coming from the US or Canada, like for us, often inflation is something very artificial or abstract. It's like a number. We hear it's 8.4% or it's 9% or it's 2%. But I don't think that most people, some people of course experience it, but a lot of people have no idea what that means for them every day. And working with Liv, what I understood is how, how inflation really actually gives form to bodies, how it really shapes your language, your body physically, your desires, your imaginary, in a really intense way. And it's something I don't understand yet, but it's something I'm really interested in. And so the next 2 to 3 years of my research will be trying to understand that, to move it from something that is purely abstract to understanding the real, like how does it impact everything that you are and everything that you do. And and so through that, looking back at like historical moments where monetary instruments and exchanges have shifted. So going way back to the 18th century or the 17th century, looking at key moments where things have shifted. Looking also at, in terms of art history, moments like the Weimar Republic, or moments where hyperinflation really intersected with cultural practices in a way that maybe we've forgotten. So looking at, for example, the relationship between hyperinflation and the Bauhaus. So trying to understand these kind of moments, and also looking at contemporary practice today. So this research into the kind of economic forms, or the economy and hospitality, currently has 3 main sites. Here, Buenos Aires, and I'm hoping, so Buenos Aires and here is, that's already confirmed and ongoing. And the 3rd site that I'm trying to activate now is Beirut. So understanding it across also sort of 3 continents in the present and in that relationship. So. And here, the reason why Portugal was so interesting to me is that right now, I mean, you know all this, so it's like kind of silly for me to say it, but Portugal is being presented as the golden child of Europe. The story that is told to us anyhow as recipients on the other side of the ocean is, there was this very terrible financial crisis, and in 10 years this country rose up, but what are the solutions, and what allowed that, and how does it really impact people? So this is what I'm trying to understand here, also in the relationship with, with the dictatorship, with the wars in the 70s, and it's not just this story that is purely abstract and economic, but that traverses all of these very messy and complex realities. So I'll leave it at that for now, and I'd love to hear your feedback. And I'm sure a lot of the things I said about here is very naive, and you're like, oh my God, she didn't say that. So please help me. Yeah, that's why I'm here, is to learn. So, yeah.
Well, I have a question, commentaries and questions. You talk about hospitality and currency as the main themes of your work. Of course, I'm not trying to reduce it because it has so much, everything that you talked about. Then you talked also about the racial part.
Yes.
And in which way it has to do with hospitality. Because I was thinking of a very mundane thing of we receive someone at our house.
Yes.
If it's, of course I'm generalizing, if it's a black person, some people will say, okay, I'm not going to, I doubt that this person, I can trust in this person. If it's a white person, okay, I will receive it. You will have all the hospitality I give to everyone in my life. Although I think it's if you dissect it, it goes to money, it goes to currency. Because if that black person is rich, if that black person or whatever dresses well and it has money, they will have the same hospitality as the other white person. So I think that money, currency, economics are more important for our relationship with other people than the skin color, for example. those were my thoughts now, and I would like to.
No, that's really interesting. So, and thank you for that question, because it allows me, you know, I mean, theoretically, it's like, you know, it's a really long thing. So for me, so often, like, our countries will say, like, I'm a host country, right? We often hear that in Europe and North America also. And so but there is no such thing, like, you are not a host. You become a host when a guest shows up. The guest makes you a host. So it's not a status, it's, I guess, an event or an encounter, right? And the moment that guest leaves, you're no longer a host. That person's gone. So it's a co-produced relationship, and this is where the hostility comes in, because in that co-production there has to be as much threat on either side. And so I would say that, you know, the moment that you can actually see the I mean, and what you know, it's very difficult theoretically, but when you say you know, a black person or a white person, so there's been an operation of sight. You've seen someone. So for me, hospitality, the best example is your door is closed, somebody knocks at the door. If you say, who is it? Game over. Because you've asked for their identity paper, or you've asked. So for hospitality to happen, somebody knocks at the door, you don't ask, you open. If there's anything else, any negotiation, then we've moved somewhere else. And I know that's like really, so my question, like all of this is also to ask questions about curating, about criticism, about art institutions. So think of the person knocking at the door. What form would that take for an institution, or as a curator, when I work with an artist? How can I enact this? Or when I encounter a work, to write about it, right? Usually criticism, for instance, is all about value and judgment. What you try to do is place the work, right? You're asking it, whether your identity paper, who are you? Instead of encountering the work and trying to bear witness, and you're writing to that encounter, that, you know, what happens once you open the door? So how do you write like that? So, you know, to me, that's a really interesting question. I've started to try to do that a little bit. But yeah, so coming back to your question, I think already once there's been, you know, once you've asked or seen, then yeah. And so the best example is...
It's a hostile gesture.
Yes, I think it is, yeah. And so I think that, you know, the best hospitality also, for me, not the best hospitality, but the kind of ideal, which may not have, is so that the relationship is co-produced and it's temporary. So, you know, I knock at the door, I open it. The person inside the house could be a sociopath, right? And the person outside could have guns like everywhere, but we don't know that. And there's an equal possible threat. Like, and then the relationship ends when the person leaves. So it's co-produced, it's temporary, and it's very specific. So you can't say I'm a host country, I welcome everyone. It's very specific. And so the kind of best example in a way is the placenta, right? So, I mean, I think hospitality, and that's a very tricky moment when you move towards reproduction, but the placenta doesn't pre-exist. Like, a woman doesn't walk around with a placenta, right? And it doesn't exist after the babies come out. So it's co-produced by that encounter. It has a specific purpose. It's for both shelter, but it's very threatening, and it ends. So, you know, what would a museum as placenta be? Or, you know, Zaratan is thinking of it as a placenta with each artist that it welcomes, right? And so I don't know, these are kind of, you know, and there's other model, but trying to think about things that exist, because this theoretical model can be so abstract and like it's impossible or whatever. The challenge, of course, with the placenta is that you open this, you know, big question of biological and non-biological reproduction. Yeah. So. Yeah. I don't know if that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much. But for your what you said, when you started with the idea of hospitality, hostility, and actually it came to my mind something. I was once in a conference, and it was about the COVID, and it came very much towards like the host.
Oh yes.
The host as the body.
Yes.
Well, which is not the welcoming body, but that carries a virus, and also the idea of the passenger, which in a way it has to do with what you talk about, the host, the guest, but the idea of the passenger is something something that passes through without in itself carrying an idea of well, it has a relationship with transit, but not of welcoming or hostility per se.
Right.
I wonder if you with just this words, the host,
Yeah.
the passenger, the host body.
Yeah. So I think what you're asking is like almost imperceptible hospitalities, right? You don't know they're happening. Is that correct?
If you become a host without wanting to be one,
Right.
where the relationship is reversed, where I don't know if I'm talking about the blues,
Yeah.
but you know when.
Or maybe the parasite, because that is, yeah.
Which you also become a ghost when something you don't want to, or you can't control.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a very good question. One of my thing, and and I'm thinking about this mostly in terms of the research around habitat, but so much of the kind of frameworks that we have inherited come from the 19th century, and they're premised on this very kind of proprietary model. And so if we think of what we've learned, from questions of habitat, it's often that species cannot share. And if they, so an animal will have a territory that they will, the only thing they can do is feed and defend and reproduce. There's a lot of things that they, theoretically were not allowed, like will, playfulness, just, having fun, but also that somehow kind of cohabitation or even forms of mutualism were like not even recognized, because the scientists isolated one species and focused on them instead of looking at them really in the way that they work and live. So the kind of laboratory impact of reducing, and instead of looking at the interactions that are, beyond even like, human, animal, plants, everything is. So I would say that I'm kind of resisting a little bit these notions, because I want to look at them again from this perspective of interaction rather. So is it possible for this parasite not only to be parasitic, because I'm defining it as a parasite when I'm looking at certain factors, but maybe it's also doing really great things. So for example, there's this tree, for my research I was in California for a while, there's this tree in California that has this other species that lives in it, and that had been defined as a parasite for the longest time. And so people would try to kill it. Further research revealed that actually that tree doesn't get water from its roots, because again, this model of rootedness, which is so much linked to colonialism, right? We got to have roots this way, deep down. But that it got its water thanks to this thing that was formerly deemed a parasite, and this other plant that was coexisting with it had the ability to kind of harvest over 1 kilogram of water that the tree then could benefit from. So it's like they were asking the wrong question, right? Because they looked at it from the roots and getting the water, but that's not how that tree operates. And it had a very mutually beneficial relationship with this other species that ensured its survival. It's just that the frame was wrong, right? So that's also what I'm trying to do is like, okay, we are told this is happening, but maybe we need to look at it in a different way. And so that would be I mean, at this point, that's more my reflex to kind of see like, why is it deemed X? And for what reason? And it's often resource allocation. Like the tree, it was about water, which is a very kind of human-centric way to ask that question. So I don't know, but that's kind of my thinking at this point.
I mean, if I can say something while you were speaking, also this language of more science or medical language often has these relationships of taking and
yes.
Taking over. It's not necessarily abuse, but you don't. Nothing's for free in a way.
Yes, exactly.
It's about domination, it's about territory in a way.
And property. Yeah. Totally. I mean, so we all talk. We're all very aware. We need to, reframe, and I think everyone is willing and eager to do this. But I think that the kind of because it's so deep and it's so pervasive, and you think you're doing it, and then you check your language or you check your concept, and you're like, oh my God. So at this point, yeah. And so, for example, with financial forms, I'm very interested that. Whenever there's a moment of inflation, the image that is being used is always one of air, of bubbles. It's like inflation floats. And then the image that is used for, I would say, sound investments is grounded. Like, so how do these images actually? Because we all talk about it. I'm sure you've all talked about bubbles, the market bubbles, the real estate bubble, How does this image, actually shapes what you think, and how do we get again rid of these kind of traps that are very powerful? Yeah. Any other questions, comments, criticism? Like I said, I'm just at the beginning of this project, so it feels very vulnerable for me to talk about it because it's just the beginning. So it's more like disconnected questions rather than...
Very interesting. I'm looking forward with what you're going to do here with those ideas.
Yeah, so if there are...
I've heard about those kind of relationships. What I'm talking about between hospitality, the roots of hospitality, which goes through all style.
But I think, the other thing here is like, the sort of onslaught of tourism, right? I mean, if we're talking hospitality at the most basic level, the ways in which tourism is shaping the physical city, is shaping where citizens live and cannot live. And now that's connected to the crisis, of course, right? So, I mean, there's like a very basic question. And then the other thing, which is your government is giving what they call, and they're really promoting it in North America, what they call these golden passports, right? Which is, golden visas. Which is all about hospitality. I mean, not the good hospitality. Yes.
Saying about money.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, the most the countries which are more how's the adjective for hospitality? Hospitalized.
Inhospitable.
They are more hospitalitarian. Are the poorer countries?
Yes.
The poorer people. They are more humble. They have more hospitality than the rich ones. So I find it very interesting, that relationship between money and hospitality.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the other thing too is like every place you go around the world, like with this project is very interesting. Everyone says every single place, even the most inhospitable ones, will say, oh, we're very hospitable here. So it's a value that everyone theoretically values and claims as their own. So, you know, and it's been really great because everyone, every country or culture or group thinks they're the most hospitable. And I think that's really beautiful because yes, they are. And at the same time, nobody is, right? But yeah, I mean, it's like I've never been to a place where people will say, we hate foreigners. Like they will never say that, you know. It's like, oh no, what do you think about French hospitality? Aren't Canadians hospitable? You know, every single person. So again, it's like taking this thing that is very shared and that people claim for themselves as a gateway to explore much more complex questions, kind of like the birds, right? Yeah.
I have another remark, and it has to do with the conversation we had precisely about tourism, immigration.
Yes.
And what you talked about once, that there were lots of Portuguese immigrants in Canada.
Yes.
That you just mentioned about the saying yes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you say yes to whatever comes. And I was wondering, and I'll put it on a very, let's say, precise ways, is actually this relationship to tourism. How to, well, and the personal relationship, how to say no to a tourist, which in a way I think is wrong. You know, I think, you know, you have to welcome people regardless of, because you don't know, as you have to welcome immigrants, I think. So the question is, when what you're saying, I think you're placing a judgment on the tourist.
Right.
Am I, well, I don't know if you could talk
Yeah, no, I think thank you for that. Yeah.
I'm not trying to defend
Yeah,
tourism,
no.
but on a day-to-day level,
On a yeah.
how to negotiate this.
Yeah, I grew up in Quebec City, so I don't know if, but Quebec City is kind of like it's the most European place in North America. Like my mother doesn't speak English. My family's been there for over 300 years and she still doesn't speak English. And the city looks as if like you were in Paris. So I grew up with this, you know, it's like this fake Francophone Disneyland, and everyone comes to it, especially in the winter. It's so exotic. I think, I don't know. I mean, it's a very good question because I haven't thought about it, and you've like put your finger on it, and I need to think about it more deeply. But for me, I think it's a question of proportions. And I don't know how that works because I just said hospitality is not about accounting, and now I'm talking about proportions. But it's like when a place is literally taken over. I guess when the hostility is, you know, taken over by, and I don't know. So for me, that's where it becomes problematic when people who used to live in a area of town can no longer afford to live there in vast proportion, and it becomes really deeply problematic. But I haven't theorized it or.
I mean, for instance, I think there's in a way, in terms of discourse, actually, the anti-tourism and the anti-immigration are very close. You know, not in terms of practice, if you
Right.
believe it, I think people can separate that. But often people mix, oh, I don't like tourists, I don't like foreigners, you know, and all of a sudden, there's also
Interesting.
immigrants on the same.
Interesting.
They're taking over. You know, even this idea of taking over, you know, there's a smash that is not very comfortable.
So it's interesting because we were just in Barcelona in the summer, and all over the city there's these graffitis that say, tourists go home, welcome immigrants, which of course I loved. But what you're pointing to is you know, it's another form of what you were saying, that often they get blended into the same discourse, sometimes in opposition. One is welcome, one is not, and sometimes just blended, like all foreigners. But yeah, that's really, I need to think about that. Thank you.
I think what makes a difference is what Denise was saying. When it changes the situation, it shifts it toward welcoming more tourists because they have more, I don't know, resources. But and we tend to, people tend to think that the parasites are immigrants. But entire countries are built upon immigrant labor. So
Absolutely.
labor, so who are the parasites? And I agree that everyone is blended. That there's no place, there's no property. I mean, we are. I am like the result of two blended cultures,
Yeah.
and I'm like not even white, not even black. I don't know what I am, but that doesn't even matter.
Yeah.
So, and thinking about, I like the think about blending, and I don't know where to draw the line, and probably shouldn't have like physical lines.
No.
For me, it's just okay to receive people, and to, I think it's, I get more richer if I get to experience a bit of each people's culture, instead of being afraid of the difference. So this is what I believe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry.
Yeah, but I think also in terms of the tourism equation, and so, you know, we're talking tourism, money, people bringing in money, but to build the infrastructure for tourism is very expensive. So who pays for that? Cities, countries, so taxpayers. So in a way, each and every one of you is subsidizing the person staying in a hotel room or the person coming in on a cruise ship. So I think we need to be better at articulating that too, that, you know, tourism don't just bring money, they cost a lot. The cost of cleaning the street and the trash that they leave. And I think Venice maybe is a place to look as a good example there, given the legislation that they pass. It's not anti-tourism, but it's just citizens coming together to say, we love it, but, you know, let's talk about the real, so I don't know, but I think I would add that to the question. And I think our governments, of course, all hide those costs, right? So I don't know, just throwing that in the equation. Yeah.
Do you think the idea differs though, why would you think that people in less rich countries would be more hospitable? I would say it's the idea of money. Almost like I come from Egypt, and the idea of especially in the historic areas, extremely touristic areas, why people are nice to people that look for like foreigners is money, purely money, obviously. And like this is, and I do not like to think about that as being not hospitable, but it's like it's not hospitable. You know what I mean? Like, this is not the idea that you're not being nice just genuinely. You're being nice because you want money right now. And like you want to give someone directions and you ask for money right away. Like you have money very clear and important. Like in richer countries, this really varies. Like this is what I've noticed here. Like a lot of people just help just for the sake of helping. Like people in much less countries, it's really different.
Yeah.
And also like the idea of what you said about like when you receive someone and become a host, I kind of disagree with that. The idea of like the host is a personality also. Like you could be in a way welcoming or not welcoming.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
I know it's an idea. You know what I mean? Like it's either like you're always willing to let people in and willing to help people, or you're not. You just want someone alone, which is also fine. Like you don't become a host once you receive someone. You just once you have the idea of I would like people to be with me in my life, and I would like people to be in my space. This is the idea of hospitality.
Yeah. So what I was saying, like the hostility bit is like for me theoretically, it's part of the whole thing. So yes, like even if I've welcomed you into my home, you know, or you're not. It's not just like flowers and there's going to be tensions all the time. Otherwise, it's something else. Otherwise, you're providing a service, right? Like you're in, or just like we talk about the service industry where I'm paid to, to bring you lunch. But if it's a hospitable relationship, there will be tension all the way, and it should be like it could be reversible at any moment. Like, so the guest could at some point basically take over your house, take you hostage, right? And likewise, the host could do the same thing. So there has to be this, like, all the way through, not just at the moment when I open the door, but the relationship is, is built that way. And it's not also, and it's not also the other kind of model that we hear is like 3 is better than, or a relationship is more than the 2-party. It's like bigger than 3. It's not that either. So yeah, but thank you for the comment about, how poor countries. So that there would be this kind of notion of, this notion of accounting. So I will. I'm doing this with you because I want money. Yeah.
Because I want anything. It's thinking of something in return that makes it like where does the hospitality point stop and becomes like something of
A transaction.
exactly.
Yeah, but I'm more in the middle. I think people can be genuinely hospitable, but the fact that they are there and have less resources, maybe they are more keen to or more inclined to, to nurture social exchange, probably, and not so focused on money, even if you don't want money in return for receiving something. I don't know, because
It could be, of course, what I'm saying.
yeah,
It's a general idea of it.
Yeah.
Of course, you meet a lot of nice people that are actually genuinely hospitable. Where do you draw the line, like you said, between the idea of hospitality and being and doing this just because I want something?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and yes. So when I'm working through these questions, I try to look at what you just said, and then look at it from the question of sort of environmental discourse, and then how would it inflect then how we think of the body now, and then and then you test the thing from different places, and it gets refined. And it's also why for me, like, the exhibition should not be just a one-off, because they keep living. And then maybe what I'm learning as I'm asking about economy right now will help me kind of rethink what I was thinking about the body, or vice versa. Like, the body might help me think down the line when I'm looking at meteorites. And often when we do research, as curators, we do project work. So we work towards a singular outcome. And sometimes that singular outcome will travel, but it will be identical as it travels. So how do you have all of these conversations going on? And I guess the exciting potential for me is that as they're all moving, I'll learn something from the oddest of places that will help me think about this other one differently. And so that's also why I've kind of structured it this way.
You said something about the idea of that money is more important than money has more weight when you think about how when you host people, how we deal with them.
Or the way you dress.
Yeah, no, but I really think it's more about the country, because it's more about things in common. It's not about the money, because I can be very rich and being with someone that is from Mexico that is very rich. We want to have excellent common. As an Egyptian, I can talk with someone that is from a very different class of Egypt. We have a conversation about something that we both live actually every day. This is I think your references matter much more than actually your class.
Maybe it depends on cultures, countries, and the person.
And the references, also if how westernized you are as a person in this country, how exposed you are to other people, and how open it is. It really differs much more towards what you are exposed to too much more than like your
Mhm.
even like because you could find very very rich people that actually that are not not have a good education that would allow them to be just to have the same references as you know, but like they do have the money and they do just in a very specific way. But like it's just not possible to make conversation about anything. You just stop. There's nothing in common.
There's always food.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, but I also understand what you mean. My questions are, I'm thinking.
Yeah.
I don't have an
No,
opinion.
I'm also.
And I think that there are forms of hospitality too, if we're talking about, like very rich people, where it becomes a way to accrue cultural capital. So I might make a great show of hospitality. I'll throw a big expensive dinner and, but approaching it in a way that dinner will, the benefits to me, to my social standing or my cultural position or my business development will be greater than, so it, it can also go the other, the other way where it becomes a simple tool, and it has nothing to do with hosting, so that's why it's part of that. It should not be accounting. Yeah. Any other?
I have another.
Good.
Well, it had to do. Well, I think there's lots of people here relating to language.
Yes.
It's the idea of hospital. Where does hospital fit in hospitality?
Yeah.
And I don't know what's the root of the word.
Yeah, no, it's from the same place. Yeah, I mean, the hospital was initially, it's from the same place, and that was also really interesting for me, thinking about the body and hospitality, that there is this, both this institution, but also this architecture of receiving, and there are also like other forms before hospital, like spaces of healing, right? But it gets codified in the term hospital, and if I remember correctly, it's in relationship to some military incident where all of a sudden there was, a lot of people needed care, and there was a term called hospital that was developed to receive them, versus.
The question there is the guest, who in a way is not the one thing, it's not a thing of will.
Mm-hmm.
Become a guest because
You need it, yeah. Okay. Last questions? Oh, thanks so much.
Thank you.
And you can find me on all social. If you have an idea or you want to keep the conversation going, just just reach out, or you can ask Enrique also for my email address. And I mean it. So
Thank you.
yeah, thank you.
Thank you.